Shana Tova. Years ago, when my children were 7 and 2, respectively, I took a job as a rabbi of a summer camp in Colorado. Just so you get a picture of what was going on, my daughter was at the phase where, as a Spanish speaker, she said we were going to a Jewish camp. So we went off to the Jewish camp in Colorado. My son got free camp, and we got to be out of the Houston heat. And incidentally, you can't walk a few hundred feet in parts of Colorado in the summer without bumping into a Texas Jew. It's like the Babylonian exile there. But I was the camp rabbi, and I was also a mom, so I made sure that my son had all the proper clothing and the water bottles and the footwear, and I sent him off every day with his cabin mates. The one problem was that Max had inherited one of my most endearing qualities: the propensity to misplace stuff. Seriously, if I didn't have my head attached to my body, I would leave it somewhere. And so it was that I would send Max off in the morning with his water bottles and his flip-flops and his jackets. You gotta love Colorado in the summer. And inevitably, something would get lost. I cannot tell you how many water bottles I purchased, but at the end of every 2-week session, we did a big camp cleanup. And we had this giant lost and found box in the center of camp. So at the end of the first session, I sent Max off to the lost and found box to comb through the items in the hopes that we would discover the other shoe. So he marched off, and he came back a few minutes later and exclaimed to me, "Mom, guess what? They put all of my stuff in one place." Well, as it turns out, there is an ancient corollary to the lost and found box. Legend has it that during temple times, in the center of Jerusalem, there was something called the Even HaToen, a stone of lost objects. We don't know exactly what it looked like, but we do know that during major festivals like Rosh Hashanah, when pilgrims would flood the streets of Jerusalem, people would come to the center of the city and deposit objects they had found, and people missing an item would come there looking for it. It was a giant biblical lost and found created by our ancestors, who clearly knew that someone like me would pop out of the gene pool one day. So seriously, in ancient times, your cloak, your bowl, your ox, your pot, these items were critical to your survival and not easily replaced. Fortunately, in Jewish law, we are obligated to return items to their original owners. There is no finders keepers. You can't keep an item if no one claims it. You can keep it, but you're supposed to return the items whenever possible. So we hear in Deuteronomy, if you see your fellow Israelites' ox or sheep straying, do not ignore it, but be sure to take it back to its owner. If they do not live near you, or if you do not know who owns it, take it home with you and keep it until they come looking for it. Then give it back. Do the same if you find their donkey or their cloak or anything else they have lost. Do not ignore it. Even if a person is your enemy, you are obligated to return the object. In Exodus, it says, when you encounter your enemy's ox or ass wandering, you shall surely return it to him. There are so many extensive laws concerning lost objects in the Talmud. We won't get into them now, but suffice it to say, Judaism makes it abundantly clear. We have a responsibility to each other, and part of that responsibility involves returning what is lost. The existence of the Even HaToen, the lost and found box, is in fact a statement of our obligation to one another. I will help you return to you what you have lost. As it turns out, the entire theme of the high holidays is returning to tshuva. For 40 days, we engage in this process of tshuva. Rambam says that there are 3 steps: regret, confession, and then leaving the sin and committing to not doing it again. In other words, we revisit what we have done, genuinely regret it, and then leave it. But tshuva is not done alone. We return to this sanctuary and to each other to process our regret. And like the pilgrims who returned to Jerusalem for the Chag, returning to each other also affords us the opportunity to look for what we've lost. And every one of us has sustained losses. This is why we return to the same space with the same individuals as different people. We have lost objects, dreams, people. Some of us have lost hope, but we return nonetheless to each other in a sanctuary of time and space that we call Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. We return carrying regrets and also hopefully with the hope that we will discover something. We return without necessarily knowing what it is that we seek. Have you ever accidentally found something you forgot was even missing? You know, like a $20 bill that you pull out of your pocket, or you find an earring you forgot you even had. It's a strange feeling. It causes you to pause for a minute and think, what was I doing when I placed this object there? What was I thinking, and why did I forget that I even had it? When it happens to me, I feel strangely elated, like I've recovered a piece of the past I didn't even know I had lost. And this happened to me a few months ago on a particularly bad day. I was searching for something that a person who is no longer in my life had left behind. I began my search kind of annoyed that I even had to take the time to look for this piece of paper. It forced me to think about the loss of the relationship, and like many of us, I find ways to compartmentalize these things that are upsetting in order to go on with my busy life. So there I was, digging through boxes of papers, getting increasingly distressed, and conflating every single loss of the previous year. It was a total spiral. The sort of ledge from which I have talked many a student down, but a place from which I could not seem to rescue myself. And then I discovered something. It was an unremarkable little card. I opened it, and I saw it was a note from a former student that I had forgotten about. One of the greatest gifts of being a teacher is that sometimes you get these beautiful little notes from students. Most of them are simple statements of gratitude, and I treasure every single one. But among these jewels, this one was truly special. First, this one happened to have been written by a student with incredibly neat and legible handwriting. That's not always the case. But more than that, this note was written by a student who I had known quite well for all 4 years of high school. She had been in my classroom twice, and we had talked through a few personal crises as well as papers and college choices. The note recognized all of that and more. She just said all of the right things at just the right moment. I could cry recounting this note to you now. And suddenly the confidence that had drained out of me in the moments preceding this discovery was regained. The hope that was waning was restored. And I was reminded of the profound purpose that being an educator gives me. It was a precious object returned to me just when I needed it. Like you, I have sustained losses in the preceding year. But in returning, I found something, and that something reminded me of what I still have: students, a family, work that has purpose, and the ability to be useful to others. We lost so many things in the past year. The child who wrote that note to me lost the spring semester of her senior year after spending 7 years at our school anticipating this capstone trip to Israel and Poland. COVID tore that opportunity away from her, along with all of the rituals of the senior year. And I remember sitting in my classroom the day before we all went home, and my seniors asked, is this the last day we'll be at school together as students? And I thought this was just typical adolescent drama, but I was wrong. It was the last day that senior class was on campus before they graduated. But there are even greater losses. People have lost jobs and homes, entire businesses, relationships, and many have lost loved ones. We have lost so many things in the past few years, and now we return. And we return because somewhere deep down, we hope to retrieve what has been lost. It's not an unfounded hope. Losing one thing does not mean we have lost everything. Often, in the wake of our loss, we discover things we did not know we had: personal strength, people who suffered a similar loss and who are supportive, the ability to see things differently. Loss is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new chapter in the story. And this is especially true if we choose to bring our losses to a community, and if that community understands its obligation to return it to us. We must come here without expectation. This is part of the dialogue of being Jewish. What is unique about Judaism is that it's based on a concept of collective redemption, not individual redemption. God does not promise that if we follow all of the commandments, we will have individual lives of comfort and ease. That's not Jewish. We can tell that's not Jewish because it's too simple. We like to make things a little more challenging. Our covenant says that if we uphold these commandments, if we remain committed to this way of life, its rituals and its stories, we will survive as a people. It is a challenging notion, to be sure, but ultimately there is so much solace in it, so much hope. We know that suffering losses are indiscriminate. Good people suffer all the time for no reason. Doing the right thing does not protect us from individual loss, but returning to the community and participating in it is the salve for that loss. And it does ensure the perpetuation of a tradition. I am obligated to return over and over again to this community, and it can and does absorb the impact of my personal losses because my life and yours are part of a bigger story, one that started way before us and will continue, God willing, beyond us. Wrapped as we are in this story, we have every reason to feel hopeful. Part of this covenant that assures collective redemption is the obligation to return to the community in times of sorrow and celebration. We do so knowing that each of us carries the ache of new losses, and we should also return knowing that there is still gifts yet to be discovered. We cannot bring back life that has been lost, time that has been stolen, but we can dig some hope out of our very deep pockets and offer it to someone else who really needs it. I've always been very lucky when it comes to missing objects. I once left a wallet in a New York City cab, and a month later it was mailed to my parents' home on Cape Cod with a handwritten note. I was in college, so I hadn't yet replaced my license, and this anonymous New Yorker who said in the note, God had instructed him to return this wallet with everything in it. My dad called me and said, Lara, out of all the people who could have found your wallet, it had to be a religious zealot with a conscience. So I don't know about God telling him to return it to me, but the note also said that he felt blessed to return it to me. I didn't understand that at the time. I actually thought he must have misspoken and said that I was blessed because I hadn't replaced my driver's license yet, so that meant I didn't have to spend 3 horrible hours at the DMV. But really, he did mean that he was blessed to be the one returning this object. When we do teshuvah, we are participating in this communal conversation as much as an individual one. Yes, we are supposed to take a good long look at ourselves and our mistakes, but we are also supposed to acknowledge what has been lost, either by virtue of our own actions or because of circumstances out of our control. We return seeking repair, and now we must also return with the knowledge that we can and should help mend what has been broken in others. We do not do this repenting thing alone. Nothing in Judaism is alone. It gives us the opportunity to be embraced by the community as we cope with loss. But it also gives us the opportunity to be there for others, even if only to say, I see you, I hear your pain, I acknowledge your loss. It's a blessing to be useful in this way. It's also critical to our survival as a people. We are not just returning to reevaluate our own losses, we are also here to absorb the losses of others. Jewish law has a lot to say about lost objects, but at its core, it's about our communal responsibility to each other. The Even HaToen, the ancient lost and found, stands for something much greater. It is an assertion of our mutual bond. You will help me find what I am missing, and I will return to you what has been lost. As we gather for these days of awe, let us be reminded of our obligation to each other. What have you been missing, and what can you offer? When a mourner stands first for the Kaddish, it is a declaration of personal loss, and when the congregation stands to join her, we are saying, you are found. Let this be the dialogue of our community around other losses as well. Whether it's the loss of a loved one, a job, a home, a hope itself, let us find the will and the courage to say to each other, help me find what I am missing, and I will help restore what you have lost. Ken Yehi L'Ratzon. May it be a sweet and a good year.